Well, the European Parliament has voted for tougher artificial intelligence rules in draft legislation that could become the world's first sweeping directive on such systems. The law would affect processing tools such as ChatGPT and aims to curb potential harm while nurturing innovation. The rules intend to regulate AI according to the level of risk, where the greater the risk to an individual's rights or health, the greater the system's obligation. The EU's proposed high-risk list, well, that includes AI in critical infrastructure, education and migration management. Lawmakers will have discussions with EU member countries before the draft rules can become legislation, and they hope to strike an agreement by the end of the year. Alex Kadir joins us live now from Brussels to tell us more about this. Alex, the AI Act, it's now been adopted by Parliament. How was the issue over facial recognition resolved?
Well, that was the main sticking point, the last sticking point. That act adopted with a whopping majority in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. That is the European Parliament's position. But you're absolutely right to say that the EPP group, which is one of the largest parties in Parliament, had an issue with a ban on mass facial recognition when it comes to law enforcement. They wanted a carve-out. They wanted an exemption for law enforcement, for police forces to be able to use facial recognition on a broad scale. And lawmakers in the European Parliament shot down that amendment. Therefore, it will still be banned as was initially proposed. Now, the reason behind the opposition to it, or at least the suggestion of an exemption for law enforcement, was that it was an opportunity to promote ethical AI usage by government. That was rejected by lawmakers in the European Parliament, saying there was a risk of government overreach, and they didn't want to see any such systems that would look like social scoring, that would look like mass predictive policing or mass facial recognition. Now, it can still be used by law enforcement, but for it to be admissible, for it to be recognized as evidence, it has to have judicial approval by a local judge. So there is that extra bit of friction to prevent law enforcement from doing this on a large scale. That was the last sticking point within the European Parliament. But it's a lot of this debate. It represents a lot of what the debate was about, which is protecting fundamental rights. We have heard that over and over again from European lawmakers. Also protecting democracy and the democratic foundations of a lot of European nations. And that expands a little bit to the way this is going to impact the rest of the world. So a compromise, at least on this deal, but certainly a global consequences for this historic law.
And on an actual timeline, Alex, do we know when this act is going to come into force?
Well, this is the European Union, so compromise is key to all of the way laws are passed here, and it takes time. I have to say a lot of the lawmakers were quite pleased and were praised by the speed at which this proposed legislation has come through. It seems very much that the EU is on the front foot relative to the rest of the world when it comes to regulating AI. We have seen efforts in Singapore like the AI Verify Foundation that has been set up recently, working with those big tech companies, but regulation, really, the first time it's happened at this scale is in the EU. They want the next phase, which is the trilogue. That's the conversation between the European Council, the European Commission, the European Parliament, to hash out a final text to make sure all three institutions are happy. That starts this evening. They're not wasting any time. It then goes to the 27 member states for final approval. That, they say, they hope will happen before the European elections. That's June next year. So we've got a year for that process. And then there's a 2-year introduction period where companies have 2 years to adapt their processes, adapt what they're doing to make sure they comply with the law. So you're looking roughly at 2026 for this to happen. But other legislation, the Digital Services Act, that regulates social media content, will already be in place as of September. And there's also a broader conversation that will happen. We know the EU is working with other countries, other places around the world to tackle AI, but certainly a historic moment. It will only come in force in about 3 years' time.
The wheels clearly in motion there. Alex, thank you very much for that. Alex Kadir, they're reporting for us live from Brussels.